Hello, friends. Welcome to Storycraft. On this channel, you will enjoy world top stories. Let's view the video. The Missing Flight That Landed. 37 years later, the day flight 914 vanished into thin air, a routine flight that never arrived. On the warm morning of July 2nd, 1955, Pan American Flight 914 prepared for takeoff from New York City, bound for Miami, Florida. It was a clear day. No storms on the radar, no unusual air traffic reports, just another typical flight along one of the most heavily traveled routes in America. The plane, a Douglas DC-4, carried 57 passengers and 6 crew members. All of them, from vacationing families to business travelers, had no reason to expect anything but a smooth journey ahead. At exactly 9:55 a.m., Flight 914 taxied down the runway and ascended gracefully into the sky. Air traffic control gave the all-clear. The flight path was locked in. The pilot checked in, confirmed cruising altitude, and everything seemed routine. But less than an hour after takeoff, Flight 912 simply disappeared. The sudden silence. At 10:39 a.m., the flight was expected to check in with controllers as it passed into Florida airspace. The radio stayed silent. No signal. No distress call. Ground crews attempted contact. Nothing. Radar systems that had been tracking the plane saw the blip vanish without warning. One moment it was there. The next, it was gone. An emergency alert was issued. Coast Guard patrols were dispatched. Rescue aircraft swept over the Atlantic coastline, searching for wreckage or signs of a crash. But there was nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no life rafts, no black smoke trail on the water. It was as if the entire aircraft had been swallowed by the sky. The investigation begins. Within hours, the news hit headlines. Passenger plane vanishes mid-flight. Families flooded Miami International Airport, desperate for answers. Authorities launched a full-scale investigation. Every flight log was reviewed, every radar tape analyzed, every weather condition scrutinized. The FBI and Civil Aeronautics Board took over. Some speculated a catastrophic mechanical failure. Others feared a mid-air explosion. But without a single piece of wreckage or a distress call, no explanation held firm. Even more unsettling was the lack of any signs at sea. Planes don't just vanish without a trace, not in 1955, and not today. The search continued for weeks, then months. Slowly, the hope of finding survivors faded. The case goes cold. By the end of the year, the case was considered closed. Flight 914 was declared lost. The families of the victims were given their compensation. Monuments were built in remembrance. The official story, presumed crash over the Atlantic, cause unknown. But behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate. A few pilots claimed to have picked up strange signals on long-wave radio frequencies in the weeks following the disappearance. An anonymous flight controller insisted he saw a DC-4 on radar over the Bermuda Triangle days after the event. But his report was buried, and he was told never to speak of it again. The world moved on. But for the families, and for those who had been following the case closely, the mystery was far from over. Unanswered questions. What really happened to Flight 914? Could a plane vanish without any emergency signal? Could it somehow have flown off course into unknown territory? And why had no one found even a single piece of wreckage after years of searching? Over time, conspiracy theories began to grow. Some believed the plane was taken, by hijackers, or perhaps something more otherworldly. Others blamed a secret government cover-up. A few turned to more bizarre explanations: time travel, dimensional rifts, or even alien abduction. With every year that passed, the legend of Flight 914 grew darker, stranger, and harder to ignore. A timeline. Frozen in mystery. There are eerie details that make the story even more chilling. The flight manifest was normal, yet some names would later appear. In other strange reports, missing persons, unexplained sightings, mysterious phone calls. A stewardess's engagement ring was found in an antique store in Caracas years later, with no explanation of how it got there. Eyewitnesses, long forgotten, later claimed to have seen a strange plane flying low over Venezuela, months after the disappearance. Their stories were dismissed as fantasy until 1992. The calm before the storm. For 37 years, Flight 914 remained a ghost story told by pilots, a tragic mystery etched in aviation history. It became the subject of books, documentaries, and hushed conversations in airport lounges. Then, on a quiet morning in Caracas, Venezuela, something impossible happened. A crackling radio transmission broke through air traffic control. An old voice, tired and confused, asked for permission to land. The voice identified itself as Captain Miguel Victor. The aircraft, Pan Am Flight 914, en route from New York to Miami. A ghost in the skies, radar contact after decades, an ordinary day, until it wasn't. It was the morning of May 21, 1992, in Caracas, Venezuela. At Simón Bolívar International Airport, air traffic controllers went about their usual routines, monitoring incoming and outgoing flights, coordinating landings, and sipping coffee over routine chatter. Nothing about that day suggested anything out of the ordinary. No severe weather, no technical issues. Just another day at one of South America's busiest airports. At approximately 11:15 a.m., a radar technician noticed something strange. A blip on the screen that hadn't been there just moments earlier. It wasn't on the day's scheduled flight logs, and it had appeared too suddenly to have been detected earlier. Intrigued, the technician zoomed in. It was a plane, a 4-engine propeller aircraft, an older model, something that hadn't been seen in active use for decades. A voice from the past. Before officials could determine what to make of the mysterious aircraft, a voice crackled over the radio. The transmission was faint, laced with static, as though it had traveled across time. Caracas Tower, this is Pan American Flight 914. We are en route from New York to Miami. ETA approximately 5 minutes. Please confirm approach. The air. Traffic controller froze, unsure if this was some kind of joke. Pan American? That airline had gone bankrupt in 1991, just 1 year earlier. But even more unsettling was the flight number, 14. A number that had been sealed in aviation history books for nearly 4 decades. Hesitantly, the controller responded. Flight 914. Can you repeat that? Confirm your point of origin and destination. The reply came quickly. This is Captain Miguel Victor of Pan Am Flight 914. Departed New York at 9:55 a.m. en route to Miami. Fuel is low. Requesting immediate landing clearance. A hush fell over the tower. Scrambling for answers. The control tower erupted in confusion. Supervisors were called in. Flight logs were double-checked. Caracas wasn't even remotely close to the planes. Original route from New York to Miami. And yet, there it was, circling the airspace above the airport, clearly visible from the tower. What followed was a frantic few minutes of coordination. Runway 5 was cleared for landing. Emergency response. Teams were put on standby. News of a mysterious, unidentified aircraft in the skies over Caracas began to ripple through airport staff. When the aircraft came into visual range, jaws dropped. An aircraft frozen in time. As the plane descended, it became clear this was no modern airliner. The aircraft was a Douglas DC-4, an aviation relic by 1992 standards. It bore the faded blue and white livery of Pan American World Airways. Its windows were fogged, its metal skin dull with age, and yet it looked intact, operational, even graceful as it approached for landing. The most shocking detail? The tail. Number matched that of the infamous Flight 914, the same aircraft declared missing in 1955. Ground crews watching from the tarmac couldn't believe what they were seeing. Many stood motionless, eyes wide with disbelief. The old bird, presumed lost forever, was about to touch down. A landing like no other. With a gentle roar, the DC-4's wheels kissed the Venezuelan runway. The plane taxied to a stop near the terminal, where security vehicles had already surrounded the area. As the engines powered down, emergency crews approached cautiously, unsure what or who they might find inside. One of the airport's maintenance supervisors described the moment as watching a ghost come home. As the side hatch creaked open, a man stepped out, a pilot in full Pan Am uniform, complete with a vintage cap and golden epaulets. He looked around, clearly confused. Behind him, passengers began peeking out of the windows, shielding their eyes from the unfamiliar sun. Time travelers, or something else. Airport officials quickly made contact with the pilot, Captain Miguel Victor. His expression was a mix of calm professionalism and utter bewilderment. He asked what city they had landed in. When told they were in Caracas, Venezuela, he responded with disbelief. "That's not possible," he insisted. "We were just passing over Florida airspace. How did we end up here?" Authorities were stunned. To the passengers and crew, no time had passed. Their watches still ticked the date, July 2, 1955. The stewardesses were still serving drinks from a cart that held newspapers from the Eisenhower era. Children clutched comic books that hadn't been published in nearly 40 years. To them, the flight had been normal. There had been no turbulence, no strange lights, no disruptions. One moment they were cruising toward Miami, and the next they were landing in an entirely different country, nearly 4 decades in the future. The panic sets in. As word spread, journalists and investigators flocked to the scene. But before interviews could be conducted or questions answered, something strange happened. Captain Victor suddenly turned pale. He shouted at his crew to close the doors. "We're leaving!" he yelled. Ground crews tried to stop the plane from moving. Airport security attempted to block the runway. But before anyone could react, the engines flared to life once again. In a cloud of dust and confusion, the DC-4 turned, accelerated down the runway, and lifted off into the Venezuelan sky. Radar followed the aircraft for several minutes. Then, just like in 1955, it vanished without a trace. What did they see? Cha-ta. The days that followed, theories exploded across the globe. Was this a hoax? An elaborate government experiment? Some pointed to the Bermuda Triangle as the cause. Others believed the plane had entered a temporal anomaly, a time slip that briefly deposited it back into our world. Photographs were taken. Witnesses swore by what they had seen. A few even claimed to have spoken to passengers through the windows, describing their old-fashioned clothes, their shocked expressions, and their trembling hands clutching newspapers dated July 2nd, 1955. But, just like before, no physical trace of the plane was found after it vanished. Vanished again, but not forgotten. Flight 912's second disappearance left behind more questions than answers. How had it traveled through time? If that's what it had done, why did the crew flee so suddenly? And most importantly, where is the plane now? Some say it's still out there, flying the skies of another dimension. Others believe it may land again, someday, somewhere else, in another time, with a crew and passengers still unaware of the decades they've missed. One thing is certain. Flight 912 did not crash, and it did not vanish forever. It came back once, and that means it might come back again. The landing that shocked the world, breaking news across the globe. The moment the radar team at Simón Bolívar International Airport confirmed the landing of a plane that had vanished 37 years earlier, the news began to spread like wildfire. Within hours, radio stations across Venezuela were buzzing with strange reports. Ghost plane lands in Caracas. Pan Am Flight 914 returns from the dead. Passengers from 1955 step into 1992. Initially, most people dismissed it as a hoax. It had to be. How could an aircraft from the 1950s appear out of nowhere, still intact, carrying passengers dressed in mid-century fashion? But then, blurry photographs emerged. Images taken by airport staff showed an old Pan American DC-4 parked on the tarmac, surrounded by stunned onlookers and emergency vehicles. The plane looked as if it had just stepped out of a history book. Faded. Paint, retro livery, and a tail number that matched the long-lost Flight 912. For the first time in decades, a cold case thought to be lost in the clouds was making headlines once again. Authorities scrambled to contain the situation. By the afternoon of May 21, 1992, chaos had consumed the airport. Venezuelan officials were caught off guard. The National Guard was called in to secure the runway. Journalists began to swarm the airport gates, some even sneaking onto the tarmac to catch a glimpse of the mysterious aircraft. Authorities issued a no-fly zone over the area, and international aviation organizations demanded updates. The U.S. Embassy in Caracas reached out to Venezuelan officials immediately, requesting access to the passengers and aircraft. American intelligence agencies were put on high alert. But what puzzled everyone was the reaction of the plane's crew, particularly the pilot. The captain's panic. Captain Miguel Victor had appeared calm at first.
But when authorities began asking questions he couldn't answer, about the current year, his flight path, or the state of the world, he grew increasingly disturbed. Eyewitnesses later recalled that he kept looking at the sky nervously, as if expecting something, or someone, to follow them.
One air traffic official said the captain kept repeating the same phrase under his breath. "This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here." And then, without warning, the situation turned into something out of a thriller. The sudden escape. Sao. Emergency crews tried to open communication with the crew and guide passengers off the aircraft. The unexpected happened. Captain Victor slammed the hatch shut, shouting to his flight attendants and co-pilot to prepare for takeoff. Despite the pleas from airport officials and security officers, the plane began taxiing back toward the runway. Several ground crew members tried to block the wheels with chocks, but the DC-4's engines powered up with a furious roar. The old plane moved faster than anyone had anticipated. Within minutes, Flight 914 was airborne again. It disappeared into the clouds and, once more, off radar, just like in 1955. The world demands answers. Once the plane vanished a second time, the news cycle exploded. News anchors around the world reported on the strange landing in Venezuela. Some thought it was a time travel incident. Others believed it to be a Cold War-era government experiment gone wrong. Skeptics called it a mass hallucination or elaborate hoax. But there were too many eyewitnesses, too many photos, too much radio communication on record. Even more mysterious were the eyewitness interviews with airport staff who claimed they briefly saw the passengers inside the plane. According to them, the people looked dazed, almost in a trance. One ground crew member swore he made eye contact with a woman clutching a handbag and a newspaper that said, July 2nd, 1955. The evidence that remained. Though the aircraft had vanished, some physical traces were left behind. A clipboard with the flight manifest was accidentally dropped by one of the crew members during the brief time the door was open. It listed the exact names from the original 1955 passenger list. Names verified by Pan Am archives. Even stranger was a small calendar torn from the cockpit wall. The page was marked July 1955. The ink was fresh. The paper wasn't yellowed by time. Lab tests later showed it had not aged more than a year, despite allegedly being on a plane missing for nearly 4 decades. These artifacts only deepened the mystery. Theories flood the airwaves. In the days that followed, the world became obsessed with the mystery of Flight 914. Theories sprang up like wildfire. The time loop theory. Some believed the plane had passed through a rift in time, a wormhole or temporal vortex, that had displaced it for 37 years before returning it briefly to our dimension. Government experiment gone wrong. Others believed the aircraft was part of a top-secret experiment in teleportation or time manipulation, one that had succeeded and failed. Alien interference. A more fringe theory claimed that Flight 914 had been taken by extraterrestrial beings and released back accidentally or as part of a larger, unknown plan. Each theory had supporters. Each theory had holes. But no theory could explain everything. Families reopen old wounds. For the families of the original passengers, the news was earth-shattering. Many of them had made peace with the loss decades ago. Some were now grandparents. Others had left the grief behind as best they could. Now, that grief returned, sharper, more confusing than ever. If their loved ones had returned, why had they left again? Were they still alive? Had they aged? Would they come back? One woman in Miami broke down during a live TV interview, clutching an old photograph of her mother who had boarded Flight 914 in 1955. "I was only a baby when she left," she cried. "If she's still out there, please come home." The flight that defied reality. No one knows where Flight 914 went after it left Caracas. No radar picked it up again. No satellite captured its image. It was as though it had blinked back out of existence. Some say the aircraft exists in a different time entirely, one where the laws of physics bend and time flows like a river with hidden forks. Others claim they've seen it in the skies, over the Bermuda Triangle, over the Atlantic Ocean, over deserts and mountain ranges. But one thing is certain, Flight 914 was real. It came back. And the world would never forget the day when an aircraft from the past tore through the sky, landed in the present, and reminded us all that reality may be far stranger than we ever imagined. Passengers trapped in time, frozen in the past. When Pan Am Flight 914 made its shocking appearance in Caracas in 1992, what stunned airport officials, even more than the plane itself, were the people aboard it. From the narrow cabin windows, ground crew caught fleeting glimpses of faces, confused, pale, and dressed in clothes from another era. Men in fedoras, women with vintage hairstyles and gloves, children holding 1950s comic books and toys that had long since vanished from store shelves. It was as if they had stepped straight out of a time capsule. For them, no time had passed. They believed they were still en route to sunny Miami. Their watches ticked July 2nd, 1955. Their boarding passes, newspapers, and even their conversations reflected the mindset of mid-century America. The Cold War was fresh in their minds. Television was a new invention. The names Internet, smartphone, or Venezuela meant almost nothing to them. The briefest contact. According to reports from airport workers, a few passengers approached the windows, gesturing with confusion. Some seemed frightened by the ALF's vehicles and equipment surrounding the plane, technology decades ahead of their last memory. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, not understanding what had happened. One stewardess, as described by a ground technician, placed her hands on the glass and looked out with a blank expression, as if trying to process a dream she couldn't wake up from. A child clutched a plastic toy airplane, watching the modern runway vehicles, as though they were from a science fiction novel. The only one who spoke to Venezuelan officials was Captain Miguel Victor, and even he was barely able to grasp the reality before him. When told the year was 1992, not 1955, his entire demeanor shifted. Panic washed over him, and he demanded to leave. A silent mystery. The question remains, what did those passengers experience during the 37 years they were missing? Were they floating in time, unaware? Were they trapped in a dimension where time didn't flow at all? Or were they conscious, living out those lost years somewhere else, somewhere off the maps? No one knows. No passenger disembarked the plane. No names were confirmed. Only fleeting details survived. What they wore, what they carried, and the haunting look in their eyes. And when the plane took off again and vanished into the sky, it took all its secrets with it. The tragedy of the forgotten. For their families, the return of Flight 914 brought more pain than closure. The brief reappearance raised impossible hopes, only to vanish again. Some now believe the passengers are still alive, still trapped somewhere, still waiting to return. Others fear the moment they re-entered our world. They were reminded of a terrifying truth, one that forced them to flee again. One thing is certain. The passengers of Flight 914 are no longer simply missing. They are legends, haunting proof that time may not always move in just one direction. The ice mystery that still haunts the skies. A vanishing with no answers. More than 3 decades have passed since that May morning in 1992 when Flight 914 reappeared, and then vanished once again. Yet, despite all the speculation, investigations, and public fascination, not a single definitive answer has surfaced. The story of Pan Am Flight 914 remains one of the most chilling aviation mysteries of all time. What makes it even more haunting is the lack of physical evidence. No flight recorder, no trace of wreckage, no documented landing or takeoff clearance beyond eyewitness testimonies, and a handful of physical anomalies. It's as if the aircraft appeared only long enough to remind us it existed, then faded back into a place we cannot reach. Ignored or covered up? Many believe governments know more than they're letting on. Witnesses who spoke out in the early 1990s reported being silenced, visited by officials who confiscated photos and notes. Airport staff who had originally shared details of the event suddenly refused interviews. Even the radar logs, once available for verification, reportedly disappeared from the airport's records within weeks of the incident. Some argue this is evidence of a cover-up. Others believe the truth is too unsettling to reveal. After all, if time travel or interdimensional portals are real, what does that mean for the rest of us? For science, for history, for everything we believe about space and time. Echoes in the skies. In the years since, strange sightings have continued to be reported. Pilots claim to have seen an old Pan Am aircraft flying through restricted airspace. Over the Atlantic, its radio silent, its tail number eerily familiar. A cargo ship captain in the Caribbean once reported seeing a low-flying propeller plane vanish into a thick cloud, only for the sky to clear moments later, revealing nothing. Whether these stories are real or the result of mass hysteria, one thing is undeniable. Flight 914 has embedded itself in the fabric of modern folklore. Unfinished stories. For the families of the 57 passengers and crew, closure remains elusive. They live between hope and heartbreak, torn between the possibility that their loved ones are still alive somewhere, and the reality that they may never return. Each new sighting, every unexplained radar blip, reopens the wound. Some of them still wait. They keep old photos on the mantle. They write letters no one reads. They watch the skies, hoping for a miracle. An eternal enigma. Flight 914 is more than a ghost story. It's a reminder of how little we truly understand about our world. It challenges science, logic, and belief. It raises a terrifying possibility that reality might be more flexible and more fragile than we ever imagined. And until the plane returns again, if it ever does, we are left with only questions. Where did it go? Why did it return? And, perhaps, most hauntingly of all, what else is out there waiting to break through the sky? Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel Storycraft for more interesting videos.